The year was 1856. Across the Atlantic Ocean, in a small laboratory in London, an English inventor named Henry Bessemer had just unveiled a violent volcanic invention that could turn brittle iron into strong, flexible steel in a matter of 20 minutes. It was a metallurgical miracle that promised to change the fundamental building blocks of human engineering. But while the invention was born in England, its true world-altering destiny lay thousands of miles away on a vast, untamed, and rapidly expanding continent.
At the dawn of the second half of the 19th century, the United States of America was a young nation bursting with raw, aggressive potential. However, it was severely limited by its own physical infrastructure. It was a massive, disconnected country, built primarily of wood, stone, and brittle cast iron. Rivers were difficult to cross, cities were sprawling horizontally and running out of space, and crossing the vast western frontier was a perilous, months-long journey. America needed a skeleton.
It needed a material that was strong enough to bridge massive rivers, durable enough to withstand the crushing weight of heavy freight trains, and cheap enough to be produced by the millions of tons. The Bessemer converter was the exact technological spark that the United States was desperately waiting for. But it took a ruthless, visionary businessman to bring that spark across the ocean and ignite the greatest industrial explosion in human history.
The man who would see the true, terrifying potential of the Bessemer process wasn't a chemist or a scientist. He was a fiercely ambitious Scottish-American industrialist named Andrew Carnegie. Carnegie was already making a fortune in railroads and bridge building, but he was constantly frustrated by the physical limitations and high costs of traditional iron. During a fateful business trip to England in 1872, Carnegie visited a steel plant and witnessed a Bessemer converter in action for the very first time.
He stood in awe as he watched the massive pear-shaped crucible erupt with blinding white fire, burning away the impurities and pouring out tons of pure liquid steel in minutes. In that blinding flash of industrial light, Carnegie didn't just see a new way to process metal. He saw the future skyline of the United States. He understood instantly that cheap steel was the master key to unlocking the continent. Carnegie famously rushed back to America, completely abandoning his investments in traditional iron foundries.
He confidently declared to his business partners, "The day of iron has passed. Steel is king." Carnegie risked everything he had to build a massive, state-of-the-art steel mill near Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, specifically designed around massive Bessemer converters. He called it the Edgar Thomson Steel Works, and it would change the American landscape forever. With the opening of Carnegie's massive plant in 1875, the American steel industry officially roared to life. Pittsburgh was uniquely situated for this industrial revolution. It sat on major rivers for transport and was surrounded by massive, easily accessible deposits of coal and iron ore. Carnegie scaled the Bessemer process up to a terrifying, unprecedented industrial level, producing steel faster and cheaper than anyone on Earth thought possible. The sheer scale of this production physically transformed the region. Pittsburgh quickly earned the nickname "Hell with the Lid Off." The skies turned pitch black with thick, suffocating soot from the coal furnaces, and the rivers glowed a haunting, radioactive orange at night from the constant dumping of molten slag. It was an environmental nightmare, but it was the booming, undeniable sound of an emerging global superpower flexing its new industrial muscles. Carnegie's mills operated 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, relying on a grueling two-shift system where immigrant workers suffered through 12-hour days in deadly, scorching conditions. But the output was staggering. Thousands of tons of flawless, cheap steel poured out of Pennsylvania every single month, ready to be hammered into the veins and bones of the expanding nation. And the first industry desperately waiting in line to buy this steel was the railroads.
It is incredible to think that the massive industrial might of the United States was entirely dependent on a single chemical reaction discovered in London. The shift from iron to steel changed the very fabric of human existence. What do you think is the modern equivalent of the Bessemer converter today?
Is it artificial intelligence or perhaps quantum computing? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you are enjoying this journey through industrial history, forge a connection by hitting that like button, subscribing to the channel, and ringing the notification bell. Now let us look at how this steel stitched a nation together. Before Carnegie brought the Bessemer process to America, the rapidly expanding American railroad system was laid entirely with traditional iron rails. This was a logistical nightmare. Iron rails were soft and dangerously brittle.
Enceladus. Under the crushing weight of heavy freight trains, iron rails would warp in the summer heat, crack in the winter freeze, and splinter under friction. Railroad companies had to spend millions replacing worn-out iron tracks every few months, and deadly train derailments were a constant, terrifying threat. Carnegie's new Bessemer steel rails were a revelation. They were virtually indestructible compared to iron. A steel rail could last up to 10 times longer than an iron rail while carrying significantly heavier locomotives moving at much faster speeds. The economics were undeniable. The railroad barons aggressively bought up every single ton of steel that Carnegie's plants could produce, ripping up the old iron tracks and replacing them with unbreakable steel. With an endless supply of cheap, durable Bessemer steel, the United States embarked on the greatest physical infrastructure boom in human history. The country was violently and rapidly stitched together by a massive, complex web of steel tracks. Travel times from the crowded cities of New York to the gold-rich coasts of San Francisco plummeted from months of perilous, deadly wagon journeys to mere days of comfortable, scheduled train rides. This unified web of steel completely revolutionized the American economy. It meant that massive quantities of grain harvested in the Midwest could be shipped cheaply and efficiently to feed the dense populations on the East Coast. It meant that manufactured goods from New York factories could be sold in small frontier towns in Wyoming.
The vast, disconnected wilderness of America was suddenly transformed into a single, highly efficient, unified marketplace. Because transportation costs plummeted thanks to the durable steel rails, the cost of everyday goods dropped significantly for the average American consumer. This triggered a massive economic boom, creating millions of new jobs and fueling unprecedented immigration to the United States. The Bessemer converter had effectively solved the problem of distance.
But cheap steel wasn't just laying horizontally across the plains. It was about to start climbing vertically into the clouds. By the late 1880s, the booming American economy meant that major commercial centers, particularly New York and Chicago, were rapidly running out of valuable real estate. The cities were becoming dangerously overcrowded, and the only direction left to build was up. The way cheap steel completely revolutionized travel and trade in the 19th century is exactly how the internet revolutionized communication in the 20th century. Enceladus. It eliminated the barrier of distance. Can you imagine crossing the American continent in a wooden wagon instead of a steel train? Leave your survival strategies in the comments. And if this industrial evolution is sparking your curiosity, weld that like button, subscribe for more historical deep dives, and activate the alerts. Finally, let us look at how steel birthed the skyscraper. Before the widespread availability of Bessemer steel, architects were severely limited by gravity. Traditional buildings were constructed using load-bearing masonry walls made of heavy stone and brick. This meant that the walls themselves had to support the entire crushing weight of the building above them. To build a tall structure, the walls at the base had to be incredibly thick, sometimes several yards deep, which consumed all the valuable floor space. Because of this, traditional buildings rarely exceeded 10 or 12 stories. Cheap, mass-produced Bessemer steel provided a radical, gravity-defying solution, the structural steel skeleton.
American engineers realized that instead of relying on heavy stone walls to hold the building up, they could rivet together a rigid, incredibly strong, lightweight cage of interlocking steel I-beams. This internal steel skeleton would carry the entire weight of the structure. Because the steel frame was doing all the heavy lifting, the exterior walls no longer needed to be thick or structural. They could be made of thin, lightweight materials, or even entirely of glass, simply hung on the outside of the steel cage like a curtain.
This revolutionary architectural concept entirely removed the height restrictions that had bound human construction since the building of the pyramids. In 1885, the city of Chicago saw the completion of the Home Insurance Building. Designed by architect William LeBaron Jenney, it utilized a revolutionary internal frame of iron and Bessemer steel. Standing at a modest 10 stories tall, it is widely considered by architectural historians to be the world's very first skyscraper.
It proved to the world that the steel skeleton concept was structurally sound and economically viable. Suddenly, American cities were no longer bound to the earth. A frantic, fiercely competitive race to the sky began. The skylines of New York and Chicago erupted into dense vertical forests of steel, concrete, and glass. Buildings soared to 20, 50, and eventually over 100 stories tall. The skyline, which is the defining visual characteristic of the modern American metropolis, was forged directly in the belly of the Bessemer converter.
This vertical explosion changed how humans lived and worked. It allowed millions of people and thousands of businesses to centralize in incredibly small geographic areas, creating the dense, hyper-productive economic hubs that drive modern civilization. None of this towering glory, from the Empire State Building to the modern glass megastructures, would have been remotely possible without Andrew Carnegie mass-producing Henry Bessemer's brilliant invention.
The invention of the Bessemer converter did not merely upgrade American manufacturing. It entirely redefined what the United States was capable of becoming. It took a fractured, agrarian nation built of rotting wood and brittle iron and violently forged it into an unstoppable, unified industrial superpower of steel. Andrew Carnegie leveraged this technology to become one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the history of the human race.
By the dawn of the 20th century, the United States was producing more steel than Great Britain and Germany combined, cementing its position as the undisputed economic king of the globe. Every massive bridge that spans a river, every train that crosses a continent, and every skyscraper that pierces the clouds traces its structural DNA back to that single, terrifying volcanic blast of cold air in an English laboratory. Thank you for exploring the steel foundations of the modern world with us.
Reinforce our channel by smashing that like button. Share this documentary with your fellow history buffs, and we will see you in our next industrial adventure.